Well, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar. My name is Ann Ziola, and I'm the Executive Director of Alumni Engagement at Doane University. And our goals in the Doane Alumni Office are always to educate, engage, and empower alumni. And we are excited that you have joined us for this webinar today in our brand new professional and personal development program called Lifelong Tigers. This webinar will be recorded and shared on our webpage, and we are also live today on Facebook. So hello to everybody joining us via social media. Today, the Doane Alumni Association is hosting Guilty by Association in a Good Way, presented by AJ Waters from the class of 2005. So just a little housekeeping before we get started. If you are joining us through Zoom and you have any issues with connectivity, problems hearing, be sure and leave us a message in our chat box, and our Assistant Director of Alumni Engagement, Mike Stellick, will be there to help you with those items. You can also chat with each other in the chat box, and I know AJ has some great discussion questions and things to talk about that you can talk back and forth about in that box. If you have any questions for AJ during the presentation, please be sure to either type them in the chat box, or you can type them in the Q&A box that's located at the bottom of your Zoom toolbar. And we'll have time throughout the presentation and at the end to answer questions. We'll try to get to as many as we can. Now, without further ado, I'd like to introduce to you AJ Waters. AJ is a 2005 graduate of Doane, and he is the Director of Industry Solutions for N8. And AJ helps drive digital transformation in the construction industry by bringing together innovation, technology, and data. And he leads a team of engineers to develop solutions that solve customer project challenges while increasing profitability and agility. But prior to N8, AJ led the Center of Excellence team for Kiewit Technology Group and was also the program manager for project management tools at Google. He holds a master's degree in structural engineering from the University of Nebraska and a bachelor's degree in mathematics and physics from Doane University. So AJ, I will turn it over to you.
Thanks, Ann. Remind me that is way too long of an intro. I am not that cool of a person, but we'll shave that down for the next time. Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. We're going to spend time going through Guilty by Association in a good way. And as Ann mentioned, my name's AJ Waters, class of 2005. And really, the reason that we went this route with this particular title, right, is a lot of times people hear this guilty by association, and that's typically a negative context. You don't really want to be guilty by association with folks, so you don't want to be in the crowd that might get you in trouble. And so that's why we're going to take a look at that concept or that idea and maybe try to flip it on its head a little bit and go a different direction. So real quick first, just an introduction. Obviously, Ann did a great job, so I can speed through this. While this is the professional photo that they like me to use, this one's a little bit more accurate. This is where we were at the time I was about to graduate from Doane. This is my wife Danny and our oldest son Matthew, and it's funny because I've been following along on this series, and Allison already said it once with her daughter, but we had the same joke. Matt graduated from Doane before he ever went to kindergarten. I remember multiple times where we were in Dr. Johnson's office and he was teaching mathematical principles to, a toddler. And it was great to watch. But we hail from Grand Island, Nebraska. So still in the Nebraska area. And after going to Doane and getting that math degree, I went to Nebraska. But kind of the story will begin for the relevance with our topic today when we start talking about where things went professionally, especially with my start at Kiewit, and we'll come back to that as it becomes relevant. And then after Kiewit, went to N8, and last year spent 6 months with Google. If you ask people around N8, that was a vacation, more or less, my time with Google, but it was a great learning experience. But really the picture that I love the most is this is where we are family-wise today. And so we've grown a little bit from that one toddler to a wonderful family. And Matt is going into his junior year this year. And CJ is headed to middle school, and the twins are going to first grade. So it's definitely keeps our house busy. And if you hear any noise in the background, I apologize in advance. But we've all kind of heard the advice of our parents, right? Our parents used to say things when we were growing up as kids, like, if you hang out with those naughty kids, you're going to end up in trouble. And again, it had that negative context to it. Or, you know, when you did get in trouble, well, I did it because so-and-so did it. Well, if so-and-so jumped off a cliff, would you? Right? It was always about who you were hanging out with and the influence that they were having on you, or in either a good or a bad way. And as you got older and you started chasing after maybe the first 2 or 3 jobs, or you started looking for scholarships to go to school, or even as you came to the end of your college career, that transition to, it's not what you know, it's who you know. And if you were like me, that was a very frustrating phrase, because, you know, you'd worked hard, you'd done all that you needed to do to learn what you needed to learn. How is it that somebody's getting an inside track on maybe an opportunity that you want just because they know somebody? And so our goal today is to take a look at a phrase like this, or any of these phrases, right? And to back that up, and let's take a look at how we can make this a positive in our lives, right? And so we're going to look at unlocking the power of our relationships or our network by understanding 4 key things. We're gonna understand why networking is so easy to do, and also that it's easy not to do, right? It becomes so simple that we actually just forget about it. We'll look at how building meaningful relationships can leave lasting impacts. And we'll talk about how to build those meaningful relationships, what you can do to make it more impactful. And then we'll take those 2 concepts and we'll look at, well, what can you personally do to take ownership of moving your networking forward, not just for personal development, but also for your career. And while we're going to cover a lot of this in kind of generalities, and you'll see things that might not line up to today's current world circumstances, we'll take a look at the very end at how can we apply some of these things to what's going on today. How can we take these topics and in a time of social distancing still utilize those? So that's our goal for today. As Ann mentioned, if you have any questions, feel free to type those into the chat at the time that you think of them. No worries there, and we'll try to get to all of them at the end. Just that way you don't forget them. So let's dive right in. And first and foremost, networking. It's a super simple, easy thing to do. And what does that mean for us long term? And I've got to look at my notes here for this one, so I'm going to pull those up. And I'm going to use an analogy with you off the start. And that analogy is, would you rather have $1 million today, hit the jackpot, let's go with $1 million, or could you wait 30 days, and over the next 30 days, I'll take a penny and I'll double it every single day until the 30 days is up. So tomorrow it'll be 2 cents, the next day 4 cents, then 8, then 16. You kind of get the math, right? And a lot of people will look at this and they'll go, well, of course, I'll take the $1 million. I mean, after 5 days, I'm still at 16 cents. What good is a penny doubled? But when you start to play it out long term, at day 27, the doubled penny is just over $671,000. Well, we're still not at $1 million, but if you can make it to day 30, it becomes just over $5.3 million. So it's 5 times. And why do I use this analogy to start things off, because relationships are the same thing. You can't just hit the jackpot with a relationship and on day one that person is going to be everything to you, right? And just give you the world. Relationships take time. They take effort, and they take planting and cultivating, and then at the end you can harvest, right? A lot of us are from the Midwest. We kind of understand this concept. The ideas of relationships very much echo the ideas of compound interest, right? It is simple daily things that compound over time and add up to meaningful relationships, to impactful relationships. And it's just little things in networking that can make that connection. And it really boils down to, when you talk about the cultivating phase, it's mastering the mundane, right? The little things that are boring, that don't give you a lot of results right out of the gate, but it's slowing down to go fast. And what's interesting is, just like with the example we used with the penny doubled, we understand this when it comes to like losing weight or exercising, right? Like, this concept makes sense to us. We don't expect to go lift some weights this morning and be Arnold Schwarzenegger tomorrow. And I know I'm dating myself a little bit using him as the analogy, right? But we don't expect those instant results. The same thing is like retirement. We don't expect to save a little bit of money today and retire tomorrow, or, better yet, with studying, right? We don't expect to cram today and ace the test tomorrow, even though that's what we all did, or at least what I did. But the argument I'll make today for you all is, why not apply that same concept to your network, right? Why not understand that same idea of compound interest, of slowing down to go fast, and apply that to your network? Because there is no such thing as an overnight success. As much as we like a great success story that just popped up out of nowhere, what none of us ever see is all the work that happened on the back end that they did before that, the simple daily decisions, mastering of the mundane over and over to get to that point. So all that work to kind of set up the concept of focusing in on this is to come to, okay, how can we put that into practice? What do those simple daily things look like when it comes to networking? And the first thing out of the gate, we start simple with networking with the people that we're around each and every day, right? And I know we talked about, we'll get to it later on how that kind of relates to today's world. But even so, when we're around people each and every day, they are there, and we can start simple with just the interactions that we have, not having to go talk to strangers, is really what I'm trying to get across. And in that, we're talking about, what are their personality, their interests, right? And you get to know people. But one of the ones on this list that I like to point out that maybe you haven't thought about is their role, right? Do you know the role at your company of everyone within 2 rows of cubicles each way of you? Do you know what their job function is, what they do, who they help, what their role is? Because what you'll see in a few examples later is that can come back to help you in a good way down the line in your networking. Where can this happen? It can happen anywhere. But some of the places that usually make sense are places like the break room, or next to the coffee machine, or wherever you might interact, riding the elevator with somebody new, right? It's just a matter of saying hi and smiling and asking them a few questions. Typically that happens when you're at a break or during non-productive time like lunch. It's not something that you're going to take away from the work that you're doing each and every day, but we all chat with people around the office, so just taking it to the next level. And then the why behind it is, people trust people over brands. If you think about those of you who are past college now and you're out into into the world, and maybe you've bought a house, did you watch every commercial about every real estate in the area, or did you go talk to some people? Or the same thing about a doctor. I don't even see commercials for most doctors, right? And so the concept is you want to get to know people, because those connections can lead you to a good referral, or they can lead you to, a better opportunity. And we all understand it in kind of that concept of like referrals to doctors or real estate agents, or maybe a car salesman. But we never take the step back and kind of apply it to work. And one of the places that it really becomes evident is if you're around the office and you have people come to you for a question. There's two different ways to go about it. First and foremost, there's the I know everything. And you kind of come with that mentality that, oh yeah, I know that answer, and it's this, that, and the other thing. And at the end of the day, nobody really appreciates a Mr. or Mrs. Know-it-all, right? It puts us off. It's hard to deal with, and you don't want to come across with that kind of mentality. But what's even one step better than a Mr. or Mrs. Know-it-all is a Mr. or Mrs. Knows who needs to be referred to, right? So again, it's about having those connections. And we'll look at this example a little bit further, but if you understand the roles of the people around you, and a question comes to you that you may not know the answer to, just being able to send that person to the right place becomes a game changer for that person. Now they look to you as someone who knows things across the company, even though you don't know everything. It's been said in many podcasts out there, I'd rather surround myself with a bunch of really smart people than try to be the smart person myself. And that's where that comes from. And I know you're all looking at this and you're going, well, that just seems too simple, right? Just talking to people and understanding their roles and their interests, that's too easy. And that's where the hangup is for most people with networking. It's so easy to do that we find it not important. We find it too simple, and it's not going to do anything for us, and so we put it off, or we just you forget because it's something that's so mundane and simple. And there are no results right out of the gate, right? Going back to kind of the losing weight or the working out concept, when you interact with people each and every day, you don't see big changes or big opportunities for yourself or your career when it's just looking at it at the day-to-day level. It's down the line when it compounds over time that you start to see things, and it seems just so insignificant. But I'll give you an example from just this week. I kind of adjusted the names to protect the innocent, but here's an email that I sent this week in our office, where a person came to me asking some questions. He actually had 4 questions, but he knew the answer to one of them. Asked me the other 3. I only knew one of the answers, but because I've taken some time to get to know folks at the office, I had a good idea or understanding of where the other 2 answers were. And what's interesting about this is these 2 people don't live where I live in Omaha. These 2 people are in our Scottsdale office. But one of the tricks that I learned early on is every time that I traveled down to our Scottsdale office, I would block off time in my calendar specifically for walking around that office and introducing myself to someone I didn't know, or catching up with someone that I had met before. So if you take the time to integrate in those little concepts, or just make those little simple daily decisions to talk to people or get to know them a little more, that's where you can start to connect dots for folks. And now within Innate, I'm one of the people that a lot of folks come to for answers, but it's not because I have the answers. It's because I know who has the answers. And that's just been a process that over time kind of developed itself. And again, the secret lies in the mundane, the little simple daily things. So we've talked about up to this point kind of some of the little things you can do to network or interact or meet with people. But what takes those little things to the next step that builds meaningful relationships, things that are built to last or that can offer us opportunities down the line? Well, there's 6 keys in Dale Carnegie's book, How to Win Friends and Influence People. There's 6 keys to being likable. The first step is to be genuinely interested in the person. So of those people that you start to meet and you start to interact with, just being genuinely interested in the person is a next step to taking that connection to a meaningful relationship. Smiling is also a good way to take that to the next step. Just smiling is a differentiator in today's society. And this is the hardest one for me. I'll be honest and transparent with all of you. Remembering names has been my biggest struggle in all of this. But if you can remember their name and use it frequently, there is nothing more wonderful sounding to a person than hearing their own name. And that's one of the steps that can take just a simple contact to a more meaningful relationship is using their name. Being a good listener, obviously we always hear about listening well, talking about their interests and figuring out what they like, and then sincerely making them feel important. And while all these 6 things, you're thinking to yourself, well, this is all stuff that I know. Let's take a step back and let's imagine a scenario. One of the easiest people to smile, remember their name, and maybe say a sincere hello in the morning to is the person at the front desk, the executive's assistant or the administrative assistant as you walk into the office, right? They're one of the easiest people to interact with. It's kind of their job to greet people, but they're also one of the easiest people to not interact with, right? Traffic was bad, you're in a rush to get to your desk, you just walk past them quickly, and maybe you wave, but there's no smile or good morning, so-and-so, right? And it's one of the easiest places where we can take a relationship to the next step, yet it's one of the easiest places to miss. And the reason I point that out is, sometimes that person has some of the best perks, right? Like I've gotten some really good seats at baseball games because I was kind and polite and always interacted with the person up front. And when those tickets came in and they had to figure out who they were going to, give them to, my name was on that list. But then it's taking it the next step, right? And when you get to that point in those relationships, it's paying it forward. And so these are folks on different teams at the company that have gone to those games because they knew me or I knew them and I knew what they were doing. The picture on the right, as an example, all 3 of those folks were in town from other cities for a training, and they were teaching something new to me. So we went to a baseball game. That was my thank you, right? And or you can extend that as well to families and friends. But there's a little trick that I want to make sure that doesn't get missed in this, because each one of those photos is a different game, right? The first invite is easy. It's getting invited back, or behaving yourself to a way that people want to see you again or want to interact with you again. It's these 6 steps to being likable where they are willing to invite you back the next time. And the trick in that is valuing others' opinions. Because the only way to win or get the best of arguments today is to just avoid it, right? And in a time and place where people want to kind of stand up on their soapbox and say something about anything, right? One of the best things that you can do for your network, for your professional development, for building relationships that people want to stay a part of is to always value the opinion of others. And that leads into then staying in touch. So once you've built that relationship, it's starting to be stronger, you're valuing their opinion, you're making them feel important. How do we stay in touch, especially, even at a distance? And first and foremost, it's worth repeating, you always got to be sincere with all of this. But one of the easiest ways we can stay in touch is to remember important events. And if you're like me and you're a very forgetful person, there's tools on our mobile devices these days that can help do it for us, right? Obviously, it's a good thing if I remember my wife's birthday and our anniversary on that contact card on the right. But also, one of the things that I've done over the years is every time I'm invited to a person's wedding is just the day of, plug that into the phone and remember that anniversary, because it will remind you. And it doesn't have to be something monumental, just a simple text to stay in touch and say happy anniversary is a big deal to a lot of people because others don't do that, right? And so just staying in touch in some little way and being on top of these important events is a great way to continue to cultivate and build and make what would be a more meaningful relationship. And as an example, just in my phone personally, the text message application, you can save that history, right? And so there's a specific set of about 25 contacts that I never delete that history. And on a weekly basis, I scroll to the bottom of it and see who I haven't touched base with for a while, right? Because that's one of the keys, or a simple way that you can stay in touch. And then at the end, obviously you always want to leave them feeling better, right? You want that touch point with them to be something that makes them feel good and they feel better because you reached out and it made their day. And that's probably the hardest one of the things on this list. So I'll follow it up with one of the easiest things that we can all do. And it's another one of those things that all our parents told us to do, right? Is just say thank you. Because saying thank you when someone helps you out is a step, again, that the average person just isn't doing today. So when it comes to staying in touch, if somebody sends you something, or you get a card in the mail, or you get some sort of answer to a question at work, just a simple thank you follow-up, while it may seem like an extra email that you don't really want to send, it means a lot. And don't forget to utilize some of the built-in reminders that social media offers us. Here's 4 different kinds of reminders that LinkedIn will throw at you if you're checking your LinkedIn often enough, of different ways to stay in touch with people. And if they're going to go, that extra step to remind you, you might as well use some of these, right? And say that happy birthday, or congratulate them on that new role, or say thank you if they promoted one of the things that you have on your site. But before we move on and go into the next section, I want to reiterate that the fundamental secret to lasting relationships is that thank you one. Don't forget to say thank you. Appreciation is the fundamental secret to a long-lasting relationship above all these other tips. So make sure you write that one down. So we've talked about kind of the simple ways that we can network. We've tried to take it to the next step as far as, here are some ways to turn it into a lasting relationship. Now, what can we do? Like, what practical steps can we take to start taking ownership of our relationships and moving those things forward? And obviously that responsibility is on you. One of the first things that we need to take ownership of is that our relationships are our responsibility. People will often look at the success of others and they'll like to say, oh man, that person was lucky. Man, that was lucky, right? I find myself saying it all the time. Gosh, it's lucky that they got to go do that. But what they forget is that you maybe had some of the same opportunities at one point, or even could have met some of the same people, and you chose to either move on, or you didn't stay in touch, or whatever it might be. And so again, always choose to show appreciation when people help you with certain tasks, or when people help you through certain situations. Always choose to show appreciation for that, because it can come back down the line. And don't forget to take advantage of activities that are made available to you that might seem silly. As an example, we have an ugly sweater party every year. I don't have an ugly sweater. You can see mine in the front there. It's a very awesome sweater. It's not ugly at all. But it's the only Christmas sweater I own, and I wanted to partake in it. So let's get this one out, right? It doesn't matter what the activity might be, or even, how relevant that is to your exciting interest, right? The point is taking the opportunity to mingle, because none of these people do I interact with on a daily basis. I would argue that I don't interact with any of these people on a weekly basis. But because we took part in this ugly sweater contest, and we all had fun during time that our company set aside for us to intermingle and do things together, I learned what all their roles were. I learned what their likes were. And specifically, the gal on the right has helped me multiple times with specific questions around the applications that she supports, our safety, quality, and compliance applications. And so that was a huge win in what would have been, just a silly event that would have been easy to ignore at the office. And so these things pop up, and a lot of times we're too busy, or it's just too much to ask for us to step out. And it could be those little things, because ultimately you're responsible for how you interact with and treat people. So when you think down the line of, well, that person's so lucky they got to go do that, or someone invited them to go there, and they did this with that couple, remember back to, you are your own vessel as far as how you treat people. And if you want those sorts of invites, or if you want to find those sorts of opportunities, take a look at how you interact with folks, and what you could be doing to have those types of relationships. And it comes back down to discipline. And we talked about some of the different ways that we can interact. And I showed you some of my reminders, gave you some pointers on that. But, if you're a checklist person, get together the checklist. Because the idea of compound interest has to do with simple daily tasks over and over. It's a disciplined thing. It's not something that we can just do a couple of days and hope that that's enough. It's every single day. And it's also very easy, again, to ignore that person one day because you're too busy or things are going poorly. So if it's a checklist that you've got to put together in your phone, and remind yourself daily to stop and interact with someone new. And if you know everybody in your office, maybe it's not someone new, but interact with someone different each day. Just make it a point each day to reach out or ping or interact with someone different, right? Or set those reminders for different important events. One that could be really helpful for you is just everyone on your team, their birthday. Another quick story. One of the things that we have on our team is we've got recurring weekly one-on-ones. And so that one-on-one happened to fall on one of our team members' birthday. And some of you maybe have seen the news surrounding Zoom bombing, right? The idea of bombing in on somebody's meeting. Well, I took the weekly one-on-one link that I had, and I secretly shared it with the other members of the team. So this this gal thought we were meeting independently, and they all joined a couple minutes later, bombed the meeting, and we sang happy birthday, right? And it's those little things that make people feel important, make them want to work with you, make them want to interact with you. And I can't say this one enough. Remember to say thank you to one person a day. Just put that on your list, your checklist, or your reminders. Find someone to say thank you, and it's got to be a sincere thank you. We do this with the kids, and they try to find ways around it, right? But just a sincere thank you to someone each and every day could take what is just a normal, everyday connection and take that to a more influential relationship, right? But it's all about self-discipline and whatever works for you. Checklists really don't work for me. I've got to do the reminders. They've got to pop up and notify me. I'm not going to go back to a static list. So if yours is reminders, if yours is checklists, if yours is calendar events, whatever it might be, find whatever is your self-discipline item and use that to take the next step. Lastly, though, be willing to check the ego. And this is another one of those places where I am always looking in the mirror, because nobody likes that Mr. Know-it-all. And the most difficult ego to deal with is our own. And what happens when you start to think that you're at that point and you understand what you need to do and you have the connections that you want, or you know the things you need to know to move on, ego begins to cloud our ability to take good advice, right? And this is, again, one of the places where I had to really change mindset multiple times. And just remember that there are people that are further along than me. There are people that are better at this than me. And to be willing to take that advice. And again, when we talk about today's society, it's also not taking offense to that, right? Because when people give you advice, a lot of times we look at it as criticism, and immediately we think, well, they're just out to get me, or they just don't like me, and it's an immediate reaction to take offense to it. And one of the things that's in my reminders every day, we talk about the reminders multiple times a day. I have a reminder that goes off to always look at the best in others' intentions. So, you know, it's commonplace for us to immediately assume the worst in what somebody does to us, right? They're just out to get me. They just want to create more work for me, whatever it might be. But you know, when we do something like that to another, it's, oh, I was just trying to help them, or I wanted to empower them, or whatever it might be. So we look at the best in our own intentions, but not so much in our others. And so always remember, look for the best in others' intentions. They're not intrinsically out to get you, so don't take offense. And be willing to accept that you don't know everything. Case in point, all the stuff that we've talked about up to this point, I stole from books, right? And I made the reference to this one earlier, but I like to joke that I haven't had an original thought in 15 years. Everything comes from either what I've read or who I've interacted with. And the idea of compound interest and doing the little things each and every day, that's from the Slide Edge. Those 6 keys, it's from the How to Win Friends part of How to Win Friends and Influence People. And this whole concept of being willing to check the ego comes from a book called Extreme Ownership, a really cool business leadership book by Navy SEALs. So one of the things to remember is that graduation does not equal the end of learning. And that is definitely a key tip when it comes to relationships, because if you just go into it and think, all right, I'm out of college, no more reading, I don't need to do this anymore, it's the exact opposite. That's when it's time to pick up and go even deeper. So before we take all of everything that we've done and we kind of wrap that up with a little bow and go into, you know, how we could do that today in an era of social distancing, just a couple of quick stories of how this has played out over my career, and how networking has done those sorts of, I've gotten to those points with relationships where it equaled an opportunity. For some of you who maybe were around Doane at the time I was, this face might look familiar. This gentleman's name is Earl Wright. He was, at the time I was at Doane, he was heading up the Hanson Foundation, which is Hanson Hall, the Hanson Scholars Program. And I happened to be a Hanson Scholar, and he took us out to Denver to do an aptitude test to see what we would be good at. And that's where I learned that I'd be good at being an engineer. I didn't think I was smart enough to be one. The test said I could be, so I tried it. But going back full circle to that start at Kiewit, right? Earl was the guy I knew. Earl got my resume to the right desk when it came time for an internship at Kiewit. I still had to interview, I still had to pass all their phases, right? But getting the resume to the right desk is a lot of times the first hurdle. And having a referral that has connections there is something that can help you. But you know, had you not built the relationship up front, it's hard to utilize those referrals. We'll come back to that here in a second. The next one, this is my current boss at Innate. This is Brad Barth, our Chief Product Officer. But what's funny about this picture is I took this in an airport while I was working for Google. So I left Innate, I'm working for Google. We happened to run into each other going both out to the West Coast. I was going out there to work. He was on his way to a customer appointment. And I texted to my wife, look who I ran into. But what's important about this is Brad and I kept in touch after I left Innate. We'd have lunch about once a month. And the key thing here is not to burn those bridges, right? Like I had left Innate, I went on, I had moved on to Google, but I didn't burn the bridge. And when it became apparent that the Google opportunity wasn't going to work out for our family with the Bay Area, having that relationship and still cultivating that relationship with Brad made the transition back to Innate that much smoother, right? And then the last one is kind of the flip side of the Earl story. This is my buddy Pranay. Pranay and I worked together at Kiewit in about 2014 on a couple of different projects. But what's funny about Pranay is he's one of my best friends, and we've never lived in the same city, ever. He worked with us on some projects in Omaha where he traveled in quite a bit, but we've never been in the same city. And what's interesting is he left Kiewit, much like I left at one point, for greener pastures. After a few years, we were still staying in touch, mostly through Facebook Messenger. And he got to the point where it was time that he needed a new opportunity and wanted to move on. And Innate had just posted a position that made total sense based on his background. So I wrote a letter of recommendation to HR, and he applied for it. And the response I got from HR is what makes this story funny. Is HR responded back to me and they said, geez, does this guy walk on water too? And I didn't embellish anything about Pranay's experience. All of it was exactly how we had worked together, exactly the personality that I knew. But it was because I knew him, right? Because we stayed in touch, that was able to come full circle. If we had fallen apart or had not kept in touch on just little things here and there, he wouldn't have known that opportunity was available at Innate. Had I not worked with him, it's really hard to make that referral if you don't know the person, right? And this has led to I think 7 or 8 different people I've referred over the years that have gotten positions with the company. But again, I only do referrals if I know you well enough to make that step. So when we transition into this next phase where we talk about tips and tricks for networking today, make sure you look at some of these through that lens of they've got to know you well enough that they feel comfortable to make that leap, right? And so let's take a look at some of the things that we've been through in today's webinar And let's talk about what it means in today's world. So we started simple with networking early on, and we talked about the people you interact with each day around the break room, those sorts of things. Well, when you don't have a break room or you're not in an office, where should you start? Well, let's start with the people that you did interact with in person every single day. Those folks that maybe you took time out of your day to walk over to their cubicle or their desk and talk to them and see how they were doing. Because you may not be on the same teams, maybe you're not keeping in contact the way that you used to be. But at this point into this journey that we're all on together, it's worth a check-in. See how they're doing. Ask how the kids are doing, if they have them, how they're adapting to this new culture. And there's different places that you can do that. Most companies have a system of choice, or even, if you're still students, you can utilize your messaging systems as well. But find that system of choice and check in with them. And again, just like my text messaging list on Teams, I have a list of 20 or so people, a lot of them in other parts of the country, that I try to routinely check in with every other week or so and just see how they're doing, because I used to do that in person, right? And again, it could be at breaks or non-productive times over lunch like we are today, or if you were both in the same meeting and that meeting just wrapped up, ask them what they thought about the meeting. Because people need interaction, right? And they need to be reminded that others care. And it's the little things that count. Going back to my buddy Pranay, just this week, he said good morning to me on Teams, and I asked him how his practice test was going. He's studying for an exam and a certification, and I know he's doing that. And so I wanted to check in and see how that was going. It's not work related, but it's the little things where people care about other people. And it's always fun to throw a GIF in there every now and then because he thinks he's Tony, and I may or may not think I'm Steve. That's irrelevant, but we have fun, and the conversations can be entertaining, but they can also be productive, and they can move the relationship forward, right? But what about outside the office? If we're not able to get out and about and meet people, well, there's social media. And for a lot of people, the professional place to build networks is LinkedIn. And that's where I would recommend you start. And again, I haven't had an original thought in 15 years. This is all from our social media director here at Innate. And what she says to us as far as how do we build a professional presence and how do we network? And so things like school, work, interests, LinkedIn has no shortage of ways to recommend people that you should talk to. They're all there. Who you know from where you worked, who you know from where you lived, who you might know from where you went to school. All of them pop up on a regular basis. And again, it's about looking at things that interest you, that bring out your personality, hashtags you want to follow, and just liking, commenting, or sharing those things. And LinkedIn is a professional environment, so it's not about what you had for lunch. But if you see an article that looks relevant, or that you read and it seemed to offer you some good pointers, go ahead and reshare that and maybe throw your 2 cents on it. And what that'll start to do is it will start to build that professional network. People will start to know what you know. They will understand where your experience lies, right? And unlike some of the networks that are out there that maybe you post every other minute or every other second, if you're certain people on things like Twitter, the recommended for LinkedIn is don't go over one post a day, because you'll start to saturate people and they might get annoyed by it. But at the same time, don't let your profile go stale. It's the little things and just keeping on top of it. So one time a week, just maybe jump in there, make sure you don't have any new requests or notifications about people to connect with, and keep it fresh and moving forward. Because again, people trust people over brands. And LinkedIn has some built-in things where recommendations and referrals can become your next step. As an example, there's a whole section for recommendations on your profile. And this is one of my good buddies, Shane, and probably the person who's taught me the most about this topic. So if you really want to ask good questions, he's a guy to go to. But have you ever clicked this button to help build your rapport and your networks with other people on LinkedIn? And again, if you don't have the relationship up front, this button's a lot more difficult to click. So it's the long, drawn out cultivation over time that makes these things easier. And then when it comes to referrals, right? If you go out and search jobs on LinkedIn, one of the cool sections is, here's the people you know that already work there. So I was a student assistant on the basketball team while I was there. Might as well be a graduate assistant on the men's basketball team. Maybe that'll be a good thing for me. If I click that button, hey, there's Ann. Thanks, Ann, for being my #1 connection into Doane. So so that's just another way that you can find who those people are and make those interactions, those connections, and look for referrals. So let's recap. That was a lot, really, really fast, and I'm running out of time. So just real briefly, today we took a look at networking and the power of relationships by understanding that it's something that's very simple to do in a virtual world, but it takes those daily decisions. We talked about how to stay in touch and how to be likable and what that can do to take those relationships to the next step. And then we talked about how you are responsible for those daily disciplines, right? How you are ultimately the responsible party for how you treat people. And then at the end, we kind of wrap that all up with what can we do today to do those sorts of things moving forward in, an area of social distancing, an era of that type of relationship. And so with that, we'll go ahead and we'll jump to the questions. I know I saw the chat pinging quite a few times throughout, so we'll try to open that up and see what questions we have.
Well, I am happy to be your #1 Doane connection, AJ. So, so thanks for bringing that up. All right, guys, we're going to go ahead and take some time for questions now. So just a reminder, if you're joining us on Zoom, please be sure and type your question into the toolbar at the bottom, or if you're on Facebook, leave us a question or a thought in the comment section. And AJ, while our audience is writing questions, I just want to make sure and thank you for joining us today. You have been an alum that continues to support the university. You go and talk to current math students and share your expertise. And we're just always happy when we see you and Danny and the kids that come for homecoming or events that we have in Omaha. So thank you so much for sharing this today and being a virtual presenter for us, and really just sharing with alumni worldwide. So please know how much we appreciate you.
Well, it's my pleasure, Ann. Thank you so much for the kind words. That was, didn't have to do that.
You bet, you bet. And it looks like we have some questions coming in. We have one of our audience members asked, can you be too pushy when it comes to networking?
That's a great question. You can be too pushy. We all know maybe that used car salesman type that continues to pester or come after us in ways that we don't want to advance that conversation, right? And the key there, #1 is starting to understand your cadence with each individual, because the cadence that you interact with people will differ depending on the relationship. And the second key is to, again, be sincere and be genuine. As long as you're being sincere and you're genuine, those are the keys that will help that relationship to you'll make them feel more important and feel better at the end of the day. And if you're doing that, they won't feel like you're pushy, right?
That makes a lot of sense. And AJ, I just interrupted your slides so that folks can see both of us talking. We're going to test that out, see if it works. But you talked about during your presentation that, you know, it's really important for us to meet new people. And we talk about this with our Tigers on Tour students that go out and they host different events and meet new alumni. And sometimes if it's not your natural inclination to go up and meet somebody new, maybe you're a little bit more of a wallflower, it's hard to walk into a room, see a group of people, and somehow insert yourself into that conversation. So do you have any good suggestions on how people can work on that a little bit?
You know, that's a really good point. And to be honest, I'm one of those wallflower type people. Like if I walk into a really crowded room, one of my natural inclinations is to just stay out of it. But one of the easiest things to do, especially like if you're around work or you're around school, most of the time there will be someone that you vaguely know in the room. Now, if you're walking into a full room of strangers, that's a different topic, right? But most of the time there's someone that you vaguely know in the room. So use that vague connection, even if it's you just know them by name, right? Just being able to walk up to that one person and say hi and have them recognize you helps to insert you into whatever conversation they're already having, just naturally, without making it seem awkward, without it being too much of a stretch, or without, you know, going and finding some stranger. So just utilizing the smallest of connections to get into the conversation. And once you're there, not taking it over, but just finding little ways to add value will help you to become a natural part of the conversation, not just the wallflower, right?
I hear you. I'm very similar, which I think people would maybe think that that's odd of you and me, that, you know, we talk to people all the time, but I get those same natural inclinations. But if I listen to what people are talking about, sometimes I can use my skills as a connector to get into that conversation a little bit more. So I appreciate that. Well, if there's no more questions, I do want to make sure and tell everybody thank you so much for joining us today. We appreciate you being here. And this webinar has been recorded and will be shared online soon. So to see a lineup of new webinars, go to doane.edu/lifelongtigers. And our next webinar will take place on Thursday, July 30th at 4:30 p.m., which is a little bit different than what we've been doing normally. But we are going to feature Janet Jeffries, and she is our doane historian and covers all things Czech. So with the cancellation of Czech days in Wilbur this year, this is a really good time to get your formal dose of Czech tradition and culture. So we hope you can join us for that. But thank you again, everybody, for joining us. And as always, go doane.
Go Tigers.
Bye.